As a type 1 dietitian, I really appreciate all the research and stuff that's coming out more recently on gut health. And one thing I've more recently learned with alcohol and gut health is just like an alcohol swab. If we wipe it on our shoulder, to take a shot or our arm to take a shot, we're cleaning that whole surface area. But when we drink alcohol, it also cleans and sterilizes. Clean isn't the word, but sterilizes the gut. And that's not a good thing. So I now look at alcohol even more like with more scrutiny um, overall. And I think just there's more and more information coming out. Maybe this is new information for others, but just like the influence it has on the gut, I'm like, oh, I got to look at this pleasure even with more
Yeah.
scrutiny.
Yeah. And, things that we've mentioned here before is that everything changes after 40. Um,
Yeah.
and everything changes after 40 when you're also managing diabetes, the gut, hormones, and all that. And just how our body's metabolizing or not metabolizing certain things. Alcohol is, the example we're going to use today. So yeah, this is interesting. What what are the key alcohol related risks people with type 1 may experience?
Yeah. Definitely the influence on the liver. So
Yeah.
our liver, as we all know, we take basal insulin if we have type 1 diabetes and maybe type 2. And that basal insulin is combating basically the glucose dripped from the liver.
Mm.
And when we drink alcohol, there will be a delay blunting of gluconeogenesis, which is a very fancy word of glucose creation, glucose life coming from the liver. So that will blunt the liver from producing glucose, and therefore we're at much bigger risk of lower blood sugars. And the liver is blunting that process because it's seeing a toxin in the body. It's shutting down everything it does to get rid of the toxin, the alcohol, right
Uh,
away. So
and
that's why it
that's
happens.
yeah, and it's so key because yeah, I mean the liver is always working.
Yeah.
So if we bring alcohol into, what we're consuming, our body is saying, okay, no, this is my first priority, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And yeah, so how does that point to? Because I think one of the number one things I get asked from people that know me that they see me enjoying a glass of wine, and it's a really good question from people that don't necessarily understand diabetes. So, and they'll just simply ask, so how can you drink? Or not how like it's a point like they're pointing the finger at me, but they're curious. Can you drink? I mean, how does that affect your diabetes? They don't always say
Yeah.
blood sugar; they say diabetes, which is it's interesting. They always tend to ask that same question. And it's a
Yeah.
really good question. And you know
Yeah.
what my answer has generally always been is, and this is just my own, I know we're going to dive into all these different steps that happens to the body when we are consuming, is I don't generally see a big difference in blood sugar.
Yeah.
Um,
Same.
yeah, okay, okay, that's interesting.
Actually,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I think, but then I've heard in the community, other women, clients I've worked with, that it causes a high or low. But as we know, it depends on the type of alcohol. Like everything,
Yeah.
there's so many different factors that goes into what impacts blood sugar, including
Yeah.
the type of alcohol, right? So is that a fair kind of conclusion to
Yeah,
that
I would
question?
agree. And I
Yeah,
bet, and I am not sober. I enjoy wine occasionally too, as well. And wine is my choice of alcohol if I were to
same
have
here.
it. But I'm always seeking low sugar to no sugar wine.
Hmm.
And I bet you are too. So that's also going to
Absolutely.
be
Yeah.
a factor in our blood sugar movement. I do notice sometimes a higher blood sugar the next day, and that's
Mm-hmm.
from inflammation. Alcohol is inflammatory. Of course it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't see dramatic swings, but it is possible and it's something we really need to cautious and really hopefully rely on a continuous glucose monitor to help protect us when we're enjoying such pleasures.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we jump in too farther, because I know we're going to talk about, and this is a question we have. You know what? Let's just back up. And I'm transparent here. I will openly talk about my life with alcohol. My life with
Me too.
alcohol, and that
Yeah.
sounds bad, doesn't it? But because again, I was diagnosed at 14. When I was going through my teen years, even in my early 20s. I was very protective of, or I always wanted to feel in control of my blood sugar. Um,
Yeah.
in a safety sense. And I always have this idea because I witnessed people in my life that I, spent time with where alcohol, they didn't necessarily have a control with the alcohol. Drinking alcohol always led to intoxication. And, we've all been around that. And this is not judgment, it's just awareness. So I told myself, just kind of a self-awareness that I don't want to be there. That's not something I want to experience.
Yeah.
I don't want to put my blood sugar through that. I don't want to feel hungover. I have officially, in my 57, almost 58 years, I have never been hungover or intoxicated to that point.
Yeah.
And that's just my experience. And I think diabetes kind of has kept that check on it, where I'm really conscientious of really how I want anything I put into my body, especially something like alcohol that can really, it can lead, and it's easy to drink more, it's
Yeah.
easy, the social settings and all of that. So I'm happy that I was able to just kind of come to that conclusion. But on the other, it actually was my mid 20s, when I was married. This is when I was just married to my first husband. And this is kind of an interesting story. I knew nothing about different types of alcohol. I mean, I wasn't around it enough to even have a concept of what I liked or what was good or bad. I didn't really understand how it would react to my blood sugar. I didn't do a lot of digging about it. I
Yeah.
observed a lot, and the crowd I hung out with, spent socially with, they were beer drinkers,
Yeah.
and I never liked the taste of beer. So that was an easy nope, not me. So,
Yeah.
I drink my Diet Coke. This was back in the day when I drank a lot of Diet Coke. And then that Diet Coke that I would have socially while they were drinking their beer, then my husband at the time, he was like, and again, I was 25, 26, still never had alcohol. And which is, think back to that. It's like, wow, that's pretty interesting that I never
Yeah.
even tried any. And he suggested rum because at that time, rum and Coke was
Oh,
a drink. At
yes.
least it
Yep.
was in our setting. And of course, I did Diet Coke and rum.
Yeah.
And that's what I would mix up. And I could barely get through one because, to be honest, I was just drinking it to have something to drink. It,
Yeah.
again, rum is sweeter,
I was just gonna say, did it make you
right?
high? Yeah.
And I don't even know. I wasn't wearing a CGM back in those days.
Yeah.
So,
No, of course not.
you know, so
Yeah.
I really don't have a real assessment of really what that was doing for me. But it's
Yeah.
funny because I didn't like the taste that much. So it was just a social thing. It was just something I
Yeah.
was picking to kind of go along with what everyone else was doing. And so that didn't last long. And then fast forward, when I started to get into, I guess into my 40s, is when um, wine was something that
Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with our social settings because I was meeting
Yeah.
different people who were wine drinkers and I was trying different types of wine. Again, I knew nothing about wine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and to this day, I'm an occasional weekend, a glass of wine with dinner and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my before, during, and present association
Yeah.
with drinking alcohol. Yeah. So how
Yeah.
about you?
I I'm hoping I'm happy to be super transparent too. And there's a few things you were saying that made me like think about some parts before I knew we were coming into this conversation on alcohol
Yeah.
is no matter who's listening to us today, thank you for listening to us. But I wonder where they're at in their diagnosis.
Yeah.
And thinking I
Yeah.
was diagnosed when I was 8, I went to one of the top party schools in Ohio. I went to Ohio
Okay.
University. So alcohol was always around and the
Mm.
weekends always started on Thursday. But thankfully, I always drank far less because of fear. I think diabetes
Same sort of
protects
thing.
us from
Yeah.
indulging
Yeah.
in certain things. Um, but when I first ever drank, I waited a lot longer than most of my friends because of type 1 and because of my awareness that it's not a
Mhm.
healthy endeavor. But I do want to have a caveat that there can be a health benefit of alcohol. So we'll get there. But I always made sure whatever friend I was with, I told them I had type 1 diabetes because I just didn't know. So I think if someone's listening to us today and they're newly diagnosed and they would like to enjoy a glass of wine or whatever it might be, is don't be afraid to build awareness and an advocate within the circle when you're socializing. And I do the same thing with a new workout class. I'll say, hey, even though I'm a fitness instructor myself, I'll say, listen, I'm type 1
Yeah.
and I'm well controlled, but there's a chance I might be eating in the back of the room or I might need help.
Yeah.
So it's all about building that. And then number two is alcohol has such a different influence on our blood sugar levels. Let it be beer, let it be liquor, let it be rum versus vodka, and let alone Riesling wine versus a Sauvignon Blanc. Because the sugar content is hidden and it's hard to know. So there's that. And I was broke college kid, so I always drank beer if I drank. But now I'm very gluten sensitive. My awareness of my gluten sensitivity is obvious that I will only have wine. But beer can have a bigger influence on the gut because of the gluten content too. Of course, I'm always going back to the gut.
Yeah. It's important.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but overall, yeah, there's just so many parts to talk on the realm of alcohol. And before I forget, I think there's so many ways to demonize alcohol. What's research say? Like one glass or one serving of alcohol can increase your risk of cancer, of any cancer. And that's crazy, but no one wants that. But also, alcohol in a healthy form is it can bring people together. It can open up bigger conversations and there can be more ease with laughter. So I think like it's not a horrible thing if somebody's enjoying their whatever. But just to do it with scrutiny, intentionally, and always do no harm in a way of knowing how much you can have to keep those blood sugars level.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So let's circle back to what exactly is it doing to our blood sugar then? Because we both talked about the different types,
Yeah.
obviously the sweeter as opposed to the drier and the lower sugar. So what's the let's say we have dinner 6 o'clock, we're having a glass of wine. I know we're going to talk a lot about hydration because that's my big thing too. But,
Yeah.
hydrating before, during, and after.
Yeah.
Um, how much does that really help? What do you think?
I mean, I don't have exact science on how much
Yeah.
hydration helps, but it helps a lot, especially I would lean into using electrolytes. Like I love electrolytes for middle
Hmm.
age, middle life, menopause, our hormones, our
Yeah.
insulin sensitivity. And we will deplete our electrolytes with alcohol, but we'll also deplete our B vitamins. So I think it's important if we're drinking alcohol, also to be maybe intentional in taking a B complex, a methylated B complex, because that can just help overall the hit that alcohol has on the body, supports the liver and more. But what does it do to our blood sugars? Again, it comes down to we can't just treat the total amount of carbohydrates in that alcohol with our insulin because we have to think what's going on in the liver. And then what if we have that rebound effect where we feel more inflamed from alcohol and our blood sugars go high? So there's more babysitting involved for sure. Um, all in all, I think is
Yeah.
the quick way to answer that.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you want to go through better options, so of
Yeah,
alcohols? So
yeah,
if Sunny, and again, we're assuming the listeners here may be and I don't like the word indulge because gosh, indulge sounds like that we're doing something bad because just like you say, I mean, socially, it goes with the great. I like to pair food, and I'm not a professional wine food pairer, but
yeah,
it's like when we're eating red meat. I'm
yeah.
making a beautiful steak. I like a red wine. It's just,
Hmm.
and you know what I'd like to do too, because I think we live with so many rules and restrictions, and the fact
100%.
that if we can make smart, informed decisions about what we eat and drink, um, it gives us a choice that we don't always have the choices that we can just openly make every day, living with diabetes. And I think it's empowering when we can make those choices.
Yeah,
And like the advice that you're mentioning about the hydration, the electrolytes, and making sure all those basics that we both talk about a lot. How This is another example of how important it is to keep that
yeah,
foundation consistent as we can, so we can enjoy that dinner with the glass of wine
yeah,
without obviously the negative effects that are going to prolong into our aging. And
yeah.
just to be able to make that choice. So yeah, give us some examples of better choices when we are deciding. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. Um, and with this answer, I'll also give a little bit of stats. I think with type 1 diabetes, there might be an idea there's restriction of sugar, restriction of indulgences, restrictions of alcohol. But there's always a way. We just have to be have an idea of how to manage our blood sugars, and two, how to manage it. And where I'm getting at is with type 1 diabetes, we're at an increased risk of some form of an eating disorder. And with today's podcast topic, the takeaway is not to be a perfect type 1. There's no such thing.